So we'll begin with an opening prayer, and I thought in the spirit of today's topic, I wanted to invite us into a quiet, grounding moment of prayer accompanied by what's called a square breathing exercise. Okay, so it's real simple. We'll inhale for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, exhale for 4 counts, and hold. Okay, so I'll count us through the first time and then grow quiet so you can pace yourselves out. So I'd invite you to start by getting your feet planted on the floor. Find a position in the chair that's comfortable and relaxed for you. You can close your eyes or take a gentle gaze to the floor. And we'll begin with a big inhale. 2, 3, 4, hold. 2, 3, 4. Exhale. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4. And on your next exhale, you can open your eyes. Well, we're grateful to have with us today Dr. Chris Conway. Chris is an associate professor in the Department of Theology and at the School of Theology and Seminary. Chris's areas of research include spiritual practices and devotional traditions in Christianity and Hinduism. Chris is an engaging teacher who takes seriously his connection with students. I've heard many first-year Bennies and Johnnies rave about the scavenger hunt that Chris sends them on in Theo 100 to get more familiar with those spiritual resources on campus. Chris is also father of 3 of the sweetest girls around, Rose, Jojo, and Dorothy, and husband of Margaret Nuslees Conway, executive director of SJU Faith. When he's not teaching or hanging out with family, you can probably find Chris playing pickup basketball or competing in a local trivia night. Today, Chris will be presenting Benedictine Yoga, what a group of monks learned about themselves and God by doing yoga.
Thanks, Jesse, for that very kind introduction. I'm extremely appreciative of it. Thank you, Roger. Thank you, Catherine, for the opportunity to present today and to fulfill some of my obligations post-sabbatical. I'm grateful to you for that. Thank you to Dining Services for this wonderful meal. Thank you, Media Services, for recording this talk for folks who weren't able to be here today and might not otherwise be able to catch it. And special thanks to my wife, Margaret. We had a late start to the day today because of the school closings, and so she created time for me to put some finishing touches on this presentation. She also reminded me that we are here and not at St. John's, so I'm very thankful for that. And and thank you to you as well for being here with me today. I first began studying yoga during my graduate studies at Boston College almost 18 years ago. Thank you. Go Eagles. When I took a seminar on Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. I regularly teach the Yoga Sutras and the Bhagavad Gita in my undergraduate and graduate courses. And I say study to note that unlike some of you in the room, including Sisters Ruth Ann and Sister Cynthia here, I don't have a regular practice of yoga. So as a kind of hearer beware, this might be like attending a talk on tennis by someone who reads a lot about tennis, loves tennis, likes to watch tennis, but might not have a regular doubles match every week. So I just wanted to give you that kind of warning before we get into things. The image we have here comes from the Satchitananda Ashram in Shantivanam in South India. This is where Swami Abhishektananda, who we will meet in a second, or Bede Griffiths, who we will meet in a second, lived and practiced out their Christian monasticism. As you can see, it's kind of in a classic South Indian architectural design, and there at the front is Saint Benedict and the raven, right? And so I had the opportunity in 2017, thanks to the Faculty Development Research Committee, to go spend a week at Shantivanam, to live there, to study there. There weren't a lot of folks there. It was July. Who knew that 100-degree temperatures and no air conditioning would keep folks away? But I did have the opportunity to be there for the Feast of St. Benedict and to celebrate with the community there. We had these little ice cream cups that were so refreshing, so needed. And so it has a special place in my heart. The kind of theology I do is called comparative theology. And it is like what it sounds. We do comparison. It's a theology done in comparison. And in my case, it's with Hindu spiritual and devotional traditions like yoga. There's a famous comparative religion scholar, so a little bit different than comparative theology, Max Muller, who says to know one religion is to know none. And that's really at the heart of comparative theology as well. And so I thought this could be like an audience portion of the presentation, that we can engage in a process of comparison with something that people talk about comparing all the time, but I don't think actually really do. And that's apples and oranges, right? And so I'll need some volunteers out there. The questions I don't think will be too difficult. The first question is, what color is an apple? Red. I heard red. I heard green. Yellow. Okay. Pink. Yeah, fantastic. Good. We've discovered there's a great diversity when it comes to the color of apples, right? What does an apple taste like? Sour, tart, sweet. I'm a fan of the Golden Delicious because it tells you both the color and the taste, right? And so what we have here is a kind of laying of the ground, right, when it comes to apples. We recognize that there's external diversity to apples. They come in different colors and different shapes and different sizes. There's an internal diversity to apples. They come in different flavors and crispness and textures, right? And so if we were to think of this in a kind of comparative theology sort of way, and if we imagine a world in which we only knew and experienced apples, right, and we find ourselves perhaps in the Collegeville orchard making our way through, and lo and behold, we see an apple tree. There wasn't an apple tree in the garden. I mean, there probably was in the Garden of Eden, but that's not the one that got us in trouble, right? And we see that apple. How might we eat it? You just bite it. You pluck it off the tree and you bite it, and you can taste that deliciousness right there, right? Now imagine a world in which we introduce oranges, right? And we find ourselves in an orange grove. We come upon an orange tree. We know that there's great diversity in the color of apples. We have no experiences of oranges yet. And lo and behold, there on the tree is an orange waiting for us to pluck it off. And if we bite into that orange, what's that experience like? It's not good, right? We all know an orange rind is not something that we ought to be munching on for too long, right? And so we'll have to find a new way of eating an orange, right? And we peel it, right? And Thich Nhat Hanh has this beautiful meditation on peeling an orange and eating an orange. And so if you're interested in that kind of meditative practice, I encourage you to go check that out. And in the process of peeling the orange, we might notice that our hands get a little sticky in the process, right? We notice that an orange is quite juicy. And if we are feeling a bit lazy, we might ask ourselves, rather than eating orange, can we drink an orange? Can we produce orange juice, right? It seems to be this kind of very juicy fruit. And lo and behold, you can, in fact, as you all know, right, create orange juice from oranges. Now, the process of comparative theology then invites a move back to our apple, right? There's nothing perhaps immediately apparent that suggests that we can juice an apple, right? But we might give it a go. And it turns out, lo and behold, you can juice an apple. Our friends down at Milk and Honey Cideries have learned also how to ferment that apple juice into a delicious adult beverage. If you're over 21, check it out, right? And that's the kind of idea of comparative theology. Nothing has changed about the apple. The apple has always been the apple, but our knowledge, our understanding of the apple has increased, right, by this encounter with a different kind of fruit. This is what Bede Griffiths, who we'll encounter a little bit later in the talk, has to say. He says, "We are realizing today that no religion can stand alone. We all share a common humanity and a need to share the insights of all the different religious traditions of the world. A Christian who is open to the message of the Bhagavad Gita will find that it throws new light on many aspects of the gospel, and will see at the same time how the Bhagavad Gita gathers new meaning when seen in the perspective of the gospel." Right? So this going back and forth across traditions in order to learn and appreciate from the other tradition in order to gain new insights into one's own tradition. So when it comes to yoga, especially in the United States, that's what I'll be using for my context. We've seen an exponential growth of yoga in the last 25 years, right? You can see here the data. In 2010, about 10 million practitioners of yoga in the United States. In 2025, it's estimated that about 40 million folks will be practicing yoga in the United States. 1 in 6 adults will be doing yoga. And so there's this process of moving yoga from something that's countercultural, on the margins of culture, to something that is popular, right? Part of popular culture, part of mainstream culture, part of the dominant culture, right? And it would be naive to say that money isn't a part of that, right? The yoga business in the United States is a $20 billion business. There's a lot of money in yoga. A lot of social media influencers are making money off of yoga. But it would also be, I think, cynical to say that it's only about money, right? People get something out of yoga. And for those of you who have a practice, you know what I am talking about here. Folks experience something through the practice. The physical and mental health benefits that come from regular exercise and meditation. There is discipline, there is ritual, and of course there's community, where there is intimacy and vulnerability in the practice. And intimacy and vulnerability which may deter some folks from giving it a go, right? You have to really be there, be present in your full self to do yoga. But the move from countercultural to mainstream entails some risks to the practice. The transgressive part of the practice, which can be transformative, can be blunted by dominant culture. The practice can be co-opted. Mindfulness to make one a better worker, more productive, right? Rather than making one a better person. A practice that aims to overcome one's ego risks becoming ego-centered. And the growth of yoga also draws attention to the fact that there are many, many yogas. When we talk about yoga, what is it that we are talking about, right? It also raises questions of the appropriateness of yoga. Who can do yoga? Can I do yoga? Questions of appropriation. Is it right to do yoga? Right? And so I just want to share one of the many, many forms. I was hearing about chair yoga and swimming yoga earlier at my table. This is what's called cosmic kid yoga. If you have little ones, you might be familiar with it. I got my daughter's permission this morning to show this clip. She said that I had to use her name. Little ego-centeredness there. We have to work on that part of the yoga tradition. No, I'm just kidding. She's beautiful and lovely. And so I'll just share this clip with you because it highlights there are a lot of different kinds of yogas. And when we're talking about yoga, we need to be kind of clear what it is that we mean by it. This is the going on our bear hunt, Cosmic Kids Yoga. So this is the cave asana, the cave posture.
Take your arms wide and bring them above your head, coming into your cave pose. It's a damp, gloomy cave. We can't go under it. Coming all the way down.
Dorothy, are you still practicing? Oh, sorry, we don't need to watch it again. Sometimes you have to play the part of the guru, make sure your 2-year-old is still keeping the practice up. Jesse mentioned that we had 3 daughters. Our middle child, Josephine, is on the couch and maybe a shavasana, the corpse pose, just chilling there. But the other 2 are very much engaged in the practice. All right. So now we'll make our turn to the Benedictine yoga part of this piece. Jesse's going to keep me on time here. Academics like to talk. And so if I'm not able to complete everything, my apologies to you for that. It'll be okay. For you, it'll be okay for me. If the mind begins to wander, which yoga tells us it most certainly will do, at your table you have some handouts there. These will be the quotes that come from the slides. So if you want to center yourself on that, you're certainly most welcome to do so. Okay. So this is our first Benedictine practitioner of yoga. His name is Jean-Marie Deschanel. 1906 to 1992 is his dates. I felt like I had to include a picture of him with his dog. My mother would be furious if I didn't do that. So there he is with his dog, Champi. And so Jean-Marie Deschanel is often referred to the founder of Christian yoga. He was born in France, and in 1924, at the age of 18, he enters the Abbey of Saint Andre in Bruges, Belgium, where he makes his religious profession there 3 years later. He desired to become a priest, but on account of his suffering from epilepsy, he was not permitted to seek ordination. And so he dedicates his life to study, offering several works on medieval Cistercian and Benedictine mysticism and spirituality, especially William of Saint Thierry. And during this time of study, he is also, in a very disciplined way, seeks out all means of exercise to strengthen his body, with the hopes of overcoming his epilepsy. These twin studies, theological, physiological, prime him for his encounter with yoga, particularly hatha yoga, a practice that focuses especially on postures, on asanas, breath control, pranayama, which Jesse gave us a fantastic example of at the start of this, and meditation. What really catches his attention in his first encounter with yoga, which he encounters in some French academic journals on Jungian psychology, is the correspondence, the connection he sees between how this tradition of yoga views the human person and how William, that scholar that he studied, that medieval scholar that he studied, views the human person. In the West, when we think about the human person, we do so often in a dualistic way. The person consists of 2 things, of the mind and the body, the physical and the mental, intellectual, right? Deschanel found this dualism problematic, as it either ignored the spiritual dimension or collapsed it into the intellectual. In yoga, he found an understanding of the human person as body, mind, and spirit that resonated with his appreciation of William, who also understood the nature of the person to be threefold: anima, animus, and spiritus. This intriguing connection led him to pursue his study of yoga with earnestness and vigor. Deschanel did not have a guru, Indian or otherwise, to guide his practice. He never traveled to India. His writings, like Christian Yoga and 10 Lessons, resemble something like the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius. He read a lot about these practices. He tried these practices out. What worked, he took note, wrote it down with the hopes that it might be of benefit to someone else. Of the 3 Benedictine monks that hopefully we'll get a chance to look at today, he is the most explicit in presenting his practice. His Yoga in 10 Lessons, which began as a correspondence class, he found that a lot of folks were writing him asking for guidance on how to do yoga, and so he's like, maybe I should just save myself some time and write a book on it. is filled with pastoral encouragement that helps the reader through the ups and downs of their own practice. And at the end of lesson 1 in that Yoga in 10 Lessons, he provides an overview of his understanding of yoga, a few simple postures and breath control practices, and he concludes with this exhortation. You will perhaps experience right at the beginning, when you are on your knees and sitting back on your heels, the Carmelite's posture, a general feeling of relaxation, which makes the mind extremely lucid. That is the moment you are a Christian to breathe a prayer. On the slide here, we have a quote from his Christian Yoga, which really speaks to what he considers to be the real urgent need for yoga practices in the West. And so he says in Christian Yoga, we do not have to look about us very far or for very long to realize the disastrous effects produced on the inner life by this age of noise. And this is in 1959. The age of noise now is a lot louder, right? Spun about in the whirl of business, enslaved to countless technical inventions, no smartphones yet. Humanity is severed from God and from the world of the Spirit. Non in commotione Deus, God does not dwell in turbulence. To find God, there must be calm within. Certain senses must be hushed. In the East, there exists a large group of thoroughly tested techniques that could be termed the way or path of silence. Might we of the West, not able to profit from this authentic experience of theirs, and while keeping in mind the differences in temperament, culture, and especially faith, might we not make use of their methods to find again the way to God, to a God from whom our civilization and technology, our habits, and all the noise surrounding our daily routines have already cut us off and threatened to divorce us irrevocably. Our next Benedictine monk is Swami Abhishektananda. Swami Abhishektananda was born in Henri-le-Sceau in France in 1910. At the age of 19, he joined the Benedictine monastery of Sainte-Anne-de-Carignan. Throughout his time in the monastery, Abhishektananda cultivated a contemplative life, and in 1947 wrote to a contact in India expressing his desire to live as a contemplative, quote, in the closest possible conformity with the traditions of an Indian sannyasin. His hope was that through his life and practice, he could, in his way, contribute to the Christianization of India. Jules Marchand, who would serve as his guide and later become his friend and co-founder of the Satchitananda Ashram, which we saw earlier on the first slide, wrote him back with these words of advice. Learn as much English as you can. You will have no objection to the purely vegetarian diet, essential for the life of the sannyasi. You will need unshakable courage, complete detachment from the things of the West, and a profound love for India. After arriving in India in 1948, Abhishektananda immersed himself in the religious and spiritual life of India. He studied with Hindu teachers like Sri Ramana Maharishi and later Sri Nyananda Giri, who radically shaped his theological thinking. Here is how he describes his daily practice. Every morning I begin my solitary mass with Vedic mantras, appeals to the earth, the elements, fire, water, infinite space, an appeal to the Purusha, adoration of the Purusha under the form of Christ, appeal to an adoration of the Trinity, then Upanishadic reading. We must integrate all that with the richness of the Christian experience, but will Advaita, this non-dualistic philosophy, will Advaita allow itself to be integrated or to integrate anything whatever? The insoluble problem. And On the slide here, you can see Abhishektananda's reflections on Christian yoga. You can already perhaps hear that he has a different view of things than Jean Deschanel. But this is what he says in his work called Prayer. In these days, people talk glibly about Christian yoga. This is an unfortunate expression and leads to much confusion. Genuine yoga aims at stopping the formation of concepts and immobilizing the mental flux so that every image and thought may disappear, whether Hindu, Buddhist, or Christian. Christian spirituality should at least take one point from yoga. It's seeking by one means or another to establish that silence of mind and thought, which is the essential prerequisite for a fuller inner awakening. And part of Abhishektananda's theology and practice was to try to attain the experiences of the Advaita tradition that he found in the Hindu sacred scriptures. And he said the only way to do this is to practice with a teacher, to engage in the kind of meditation, and ultimately try as he could to be sort of stripped of his Christian formation to have this kind of experience of the divine. And so it's a radically different way of thinking about practice than what we see in Deschanel. And our last person that we'll be spending time with is Bede Griffiths. Bede Griffiths was born in 1906 in England. He studied at Oxford under C.S. Lewis. You might be familiar with that name, who became a lifelong friend of his. Their conversations, as well as his own short-lived attempt at an experiment in common living in the Cotswolds, they made it about 9 months and decided that he maybe more community to be successful, sparked a religious zeal that led him to consider ordination in the Church of England before his decision to enter the Prinknish Abbey in 1931. In 1955, he left for India, sparked by a friendship with Father Benedict Albert, in order to build a monastery there. Upon leaving for India, Griffiths had to give up his vows as a Benedictine monk and submit himself to the authority of the local bishop there. Their endeavor proved unsuccessful, and according to Griffiths, too Western. Later, alongside the Belgian monk Francis Acharya, he founded the Kurisalama ashram. In 1968, following the departure of Abhishektananda, Griffiths arrived at Satchidananda ashram, which flourished under his guidance until his death. In 1956, letter to his friends Mary Allen and Mary Dunbar, Griffith shares his first experience doing yoga. He writes, "I have had a great excitement this week. I have begun practicing Hatha Yoga. I was lent a book on yoga asanas, all these postures, by a Father Francis. I'm finding the practices most beneficial. I can't quite stand on my head, which is said to be the most beneficial practice of all. Nehru does it every morning. But I can do the next best thing, which is resting on the head and shoulders with the feet in the air. It is rather exciting. I have always avoided this before, but now I feel that it has something definite to give in teaching control of the body and the breath as a presentation for control of the mind and union with God." And on the handout here, let's see if I can track it down. Bede Griffith says, "There are so many methods, but I would say that almost every valid method is to bring you from your faculties, your senses, your thoughts, your feelings, your desires, your will into your center to experience the reality within. I think today people are seeking that encounter. External ritual doesn't mean very much to them, and a great deal of doctrine doesn't mean very much. Of course, ritual can mean everything, and so can doctrine. But for so many people, it doesn't strike them, and what they want to experience is reality. In our ashram, we practice Christian yoga, yogic meditation. To simplify it very much, traditional yoga has three aspects. The first is asana, that is seating. This is a revolution for most Christians. We do not know how to sit. Yoga exercises can help you get in good position for prayer and meditation. The next thing is breathing, pranayama. There are two ways of dealing with breathing. The yogic method is to control the breathing. Most people don't breathe properly. Now, the third thing, which is the key to the whole, is the mantra, the sacred word. We use the Jesus prayer. Father Amaldas has developed his own mantra, which is Yesu Abba, Jesus, and you breathe in, Abba, Father, as you breathe out. You breathe in everybody and everything and all the pains and troubles, and you surrender it all to the Father. So you sit, you breathe, and you quietly repeat the mantra. Your thoughts begin to wander, and you come back to the mantra, and they wander again, and you come back to the mantra until gradually the stillness comes, the mind becomes still, and when the mind is still, the deepest center emerges. Right. So that's just a rasa, a flavor, as they might say in the Indian tradition, of these three Benedictine monks. You can see there's a lot of overlap in their thinking, a concern for the encroachment of the modern world and the busyness of it, and the way that that can distract us and decenter us, right? And there's also a recognition on their part that people desire a spiritual practice, something that grounds them, that allows them to realize the self in order to encounter the divine. When we think about the Benedictine values and vows that are at the heart of this practice, certainly for Abhishektananda and Bede Griffiths, the idea of hospitality is front and center in their ashram. When I was there in July, they looked after me. But we also had renunciants from all different Hindu traditions coming in and coming out of the place. They were always welcomed, always allowed to take part in our meals and in the practices. And there's also kind of hospitality in welcoming the religious other. And in some ways it might sound paradoxical, welcoming the religious traditions as Christ. But this is the theology of religions, I think, that's in work in many of these theologians. There's a deep commitment to stability, the stability that comes with practice, like physical stability, stability of the mind, but also stability of place as well. Abhishektananda, for the most part, abandoned his desires to Christianize India, and rather, as a Benedictine monk living his monastic vows of stability there in India, began to ask himself, what can I learn about myself, about God, in this process of being present here in the moment? And maybe one final piece would be that idea of conversatio morum. Very difficult to translate in the rule, kind of a conversion of manners or a habit of life that we see there. But in this commitment to practice, I think we see that every day, and they had their differences, they had their disagreements. Abhishektananda and Bede Griffiths oftentimes were very suspect of Jean Deschanel and his practice. They didn't feel like he went far enough. He separated things out too much. But in each of those figures, we see a commitment to every day to recommit oneself to the practice, right? To center oneself in order to still the body, in order to still the mind, to allow the divine presence to come to you. And for them, in the end, yoga was a means, not an end, right? As much as Bede Griffiths wanted to do a headstand, that for him was not the intention of his practice. It was undertaken in order to have a deep mystical experience of the divine, one that tried to push beyond purely Christian categories, the language that might try to put God in a box, inhibit our understanding. Abhishektananda would say, neti, neti, not this, a kind of stripping away of those things, but also then a commitment to the neighbor, right? A detachment of ego-centeredness in order to be other-centered as well. And oftentimes, the yoga tradition is criticized for being a little bit self-centered, this idea of turning within the self. And where's that other-centeredness to it? That's oftentimes that the way that yoga is presented in the U.S. lacks some of those other limbs of the yoga tradition that calls for commitments to nonviolence, non-covetousness, to commitments to truth and things like that as kind of the bulwark of practice. Without being grounded in those things, you cannot do yoga successfully. And I think there's a recognition on their part that through this practice, the experience of the love of God is then able to then radiate out back into the world. If the self is kind of a mirror, it can reflect the things of this world in negative sorts of ways, but through this cultivation of practice, it also has the power in their thinking to reflect the divine back out into the world, a challenge that is put to all of us, regardless of our practices. I'm going to hand it over to you all, to pepper me with questions if you have them, comments. If you want to share your practices as well and your experiences, I'd love to hear those. I'm grateful for your time, your attention. Thank you so much for letting me talk about something that I love deeply. So thank you. Yes.
So how many hours a day do these gentlemen practice yoga?
That's a great question. Oftentimes, in the case of Deschanel, it would be kind of a 15 to 30-minute practice every day in the morning to really prepare him for the rest of the day, to engage in other spiritual practices that accompany being a priest and serving a community, to the work that he was doing. So his practice was maybe a bit shorter than someone like Abhishektananda, who would dedicate hours to a deep kind of meditative practice to really turn within oneself and to lose oneself in the self. But all these figures, as their turn east was happening, they all stopped along the way to Russia. And the kind of rediscovery of this text, and you might all be familiar with it, The Way of the Pilgrim, this Russian Orthodox mystical text that's at the heart of it is this idea of how does one pray without ceasing? We see in Scripture that we're told to pray without ceasing. And so the pilgrim in The Way of the Pilgrim sets out to find someone who can tell them how to do this. And in that search discovers the Jesus prayer, which for Deschanel becomes part of his practice. For Bede Griffiths becomes part of his practice as well. Abhishektananda recognizes the power of that kind of repetition of these words of the Jesus prayer. And so in some ways, it's confined, but also there is a hope that that prayer stays with them the entirety of the day. And so there's like that kind of the paradox of maintaining that prayer, even though the session has stopped. Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Thank you. Yes, Kelly.
I have a close relative
Yeah.
who's an evangelical,
Sure.
and he's horrified by the idea of Christian yoga.
Yes, yeah.
He says in order to practice yoga, you have to learn to worship the sun, right? The series of
Right, right. Yes, yeah.
And he's concerned that could be, it's a form of idolatry that can
Right.
lead people down the wrong
Yes.
path. What would these monks have to say about that, do you think?
Yeah, I mean that's an important question, one that's on the hearts and minds of a lot of folks. If you type Christian yoga into a Google search engine, you will receive a list of a lot of different answers to that question. Should Christians do yoga? All these folks coming from a Catholic Benedictine tradition would say, yes, of course. They would also caution that not everyone is ready in the moment for it. And this taps into that idea in a lot of mystical traditions of a discernment of spirits, right? There's a recognition that all spiritual practices, by their nature being spiritual, invite that reality or dimension, make that available. And so you can read this in the Ignatian exercises, right? How does one know what one is experiencing is coming from God, right? And in evangelical communities where there's a theology that might not make such practices like this easy, you can often hear a kind of refrain that these are a slippery slope to idolatry, to Eastern mysticism, and things like that. I think these folks would say that the proof's in the pudding, so to speak. These are tested traditions. They do what they set out to do. They have different ways of thinking about their relationship to Hinduism, for sure. Deschanel recognizes the indebtedness to Hinduism, but he also wants to, he uses the language, extricate the tradition from it, right? To take what has been discovered, not invented, but discovered by these practitioners, and to bring it over to the Christian tradition. But I imagine someone like Abhishektananda or B. Griffiths would, maybe fit into their sort of imagine what this could, what this could lead to. Yeah, it's a great question.
Wow. Thank you, Chris. Once again, the round of applause. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Jesse.
That's great.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I'll get out of your way.
Thank you. And I'd asked Chris before on his sabbatical if he was thinking of writing a book about this, and you said, yes, Chris, this may become a book someday. So we'll keep an eye out for that. That was fascinating. Thank you. I have 5 very quick announcements before we head out on Benedictine Institute happenings. First, we're going to keep it in the family for the next Lunch and Learn. On March 11th at St. John's, Margaret Nuzlise Conway is going to explore a Benedictine approach to justice and learnings from her work with SJU Faith and a recent trip with the Benedictine Volunteer Corps to Kenya. So you can register for that today. The next building community is happening this Friday here at the BAC from 9 o'clock to 10:45. Stop by, as always, if you want coffee and pastries.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah.
There's a new art exhibit on display at the BAC, and the artist, Desi Murphy, will be there. She's an alum from the class.
That's right. New art display at the BAC, and Desi Murphy, the artist, will be with us at Building Community. Thank you. Registration is open now for Benedictine 201 Lenten Reflection Group, which will happen at St. John's for 3 Mondays during Lent. So if you're interested in that, feel free to register. Next, the Association of Benedictine Colleges and Universities annual conference is happening June 23rd to the 26th at St. Anselm's College in New Hampshire. This conference is a really good opportunity to help reflect on how we integrate mission into our work. It's open to faculty, staff, employees, administrators, and the Benedictine Institute has some limited funding to help a couple of folks go. So if you're interested in that, you can talk with me or Catherine afterwards. And then finally, just a thank you to many of you who encouraged first-year students who you know to apply to the Benedictine Living and Learning Community next year. We had a record 107 students who applied, and I think that's really exciting, right? There's a deep desire for this faith-based intentional living on campus. So thanks to all of you for modeling that way forward. And with that, thank you again to Chris. Enjoy the rest of your day.